according to classic legend, it was Napoleon's troops who were using the Sphinx for target practice and knocked off its nose. But as people are talking about in the comments, and as I had brought up in my notes, one tale erroneously attributes the destruction of the nose to cannonballs fired by the army of Napoleon Bonaparte. This is considered false, since drawings of the Sphinx by Frederick Louis Norton in 1737 already show the nose missing, predating Napoleon's arrival by 60 years. And James is also talking about that Candace just supplemented their Persian travel logs from at least 100 years before Napoleon that mention the nose of the Sphinx being gone, and there are drawn diagrams and artist renderings. So it is probably it's a common myth, I think, urban legend, that it's
my
Napoleon.
Point is, if you're a filmmaker and you're going to film this moment, why film an equally false moment that no one's heard of, shooting at a pyramid, versus the image? Like, if I saw on screen the image of Napoleon's troops shooting at the Sphinx, my man, it's been manifested. I've seen it now. If you're going to include a false detail, include the one that we've heard of. Don't include a new one that no one's ever heard of. I just think that's an odd swap.
That was the point that I was going to make as well. Regardless, because we want to talk about the historicity of it, but then also storytelling, because we talk about both here. But even if it's not historically true, that whether or not it was Napoleon's troops who shot off the nose, it's so ingrained in us,
right?
That you could have, if you didn't show it at all, then you would have just skipped it. But since you're going to show the pyramids being hit, everyone is going to think it wasn't the pyramids, it was the Sphinx. So why would you have this scene where the pyramids get hit, that whether it's true or not, everyone's going to think, no, wait a minute, he hit the Sphinx? That was a weird choice. I don't think you can put that in there. Now, what I think was happening here that was not developed in the movie, but it seemed to be something that was supposed to be out there, was that Napoleon thought that his artillery officers were not capable enough, and that's what lost him the war. Because later, at the very end, he talks about this is all just trigonometry. Does he say geometry or trigonometry? I can't remember it more.
I think geometry.
He says geometry. This is all geometry. And so I think it's supposed to be comical when Napoleon's artillery is supposed to fire at the Egyptian army, and they all miss hilariously bad and hit the pyramids instead. So I think that's supposed to, so when we hear that Napoleon's artillery can't get their geometry right, I think that's supposed to be a callback that they're so bad shots that they missed the entire Egyptian army and hit the pyramids.
But that wasn't clear. That wasn't what they were doing. They almost just threw it in there, just as this great image of French troops opening firing a cannon,
and they all hit the pyramids.
Right. So I don't know. Like
in retrospect, I think they were supposed to have been idiots and missed because they don't know their geometry. I think.
But if that's what you're trying to prove, then, or if that's your story, or if that's part of the story, then you got to drive that home. You can't just throw something in there. And again, it's such a key detail to change. It's like, if I'm going to show Washington cutting down a cherry tree, and then at the last second, I'm like, let's change it to an orange tree. It's like, why? Why would you do that?
Whether or not that's a historical thing or not, you can't all of a sudden put a scene of George Washington hacking down an orange tree, because everybody will go, wait a minute.
But that's the level that's what I'm saying. You change the critical detail. Whether it was true or not doesn't even matter in this sense. If you're going to include it, don't change the detail that matters.
And it takes everybody out of the movie, because that's what everybody thinks at that scene. They leave the movie at that scene.
Exactly.
And that's why it's one of the first things we're talking about, right?
Right. Totally.
One of the first things we're talking about.
Well, because Napoleon, he's almost like mythical, right? In Western history, we've all heard about him. We've all heard these stories. We've all seen the great oil paintings. So when you bring something like this to life, I think that as a filmmaker, you have this opportunity to manifest this myth, and they just completely swing and missed on that one, in my opinion.
James says Candace took that scene as a show of power to prevent a battle. He was attacking their spirit by attacking the pyramids. Maybe I think that's a legitimate approach to that. But I was just trying to. But Napoleon has this thing about, oh man, my artillery just couldn't get their geometry together, and so I was trying to, in retrospect, from that comment, try to align, because I didn't really understand what happened in that scene. This is when I was watching it. That's only my interpretation of that scene in retrospect, because otherwise that line about my artillery can't get their geometry together, like, first of all, it has very little anchor anyway. But if that isn't what they were going with the pyramids, it would have been no anchor. I don't know.
Well, the reason I wanted to lead with that, or at least start with that in terms of like diving into a specific part of the movie, is it just shows the range there of error that's possible in this film. There is a range that they got right, and then it goes all the way down to things that they got wrong for odd reasons that I can't quite explain.
Even this scene that goes on with him and the mummy, which I think is Ramsey's mummy or something.
Yeah.
That when you look back and this was a long movie anyway. Now, not that I don't have in principle a problem with long movies, 2 hours and 38 minutes. If it's well spent, I don't have a problem with that. But when you're trying to look at, which we're going to talk about, I know what this movie was about, what its theme was, and things like that. When I think back at like Napoleon, like a lot of these scenes take a long time. Napoleon walking, looking at this mummy standing up on a body, like that's some time. And I'm thinking, what are we getting across? What's the point of Napoleon standing here with this mummy? And I still don't even know what that point was as far as, so I'm like, this shouldn't even be in this movie, maybe.
Well, typically when you show one historical figure looking at the remains of another, it's almost like they're wondering if their legacy is gonna last. But is that necessary for this? Is that the way to do it?
Well, if that was the purpose of the movie, if the purpose of the movie, like you could say, the theme of this movie is that even great men must confront death. Like, I don't think that was the theme of this movie.
Not at all.
Okay, if it was, then having Napoleon examine the mummy of the Egyptian pharaoh early on would be significant, and it would be driving home the theme. But because it's not the theme of the movie, what are we doing?
Right. Again, if it feels to me like a scrapbook. Here's Napoleon looking at a mummy. Here's a photo of it. Let's film that. Where they're almost, like in your trailer, or what the AI can generate a slightly moving photograph in a sense, right? That's what the AI can generate.
Wait. The moving picture. Yeah.
Right. I saw like this 1920s Star Wars thing. I think everybody has seen. So in a way, I feel like Napoleon was a very advanced version of that. Like, here's a photograph that I have in my head. Let's film a scene where this moves around. Maybe there's dialogue in it. So that's why I feel like it's more like a scrapbook than a story.